Good afternoon. This is Dyke Hendrickson, and I am the host of the podcast, Life Along the Merrimack. Each week we get together for about half an hour and talk about the health and history of the Merrimack River. We've also talking about Plum Island lately. And I want to talk about Plum Island a little bit today. To the right in our photo here, you can see the tip of Plum Island. Of course, you can see the Merrimack River. You can see boats. You can see that sandbar. And so the Merrimack River and Plum Island have been in the news recently. There's a big study going on by a group called Storm Surge. They're a North Shore group. And they're concerned that climate change is going to make bad things happen to Plum Island, such as more flooding, more erosion, and more difficulties in keeping the roads and the thoroughfares open. And they had, Storm Surge had consultants in who actually gave two different presentations in the last month. And they were interesting because, they're definitely talking about greater flooding in the future from both sides, from the Atlantic, but also from the Merrimack side. It's called the Bay side. The river is rising, and a lot of the houses on the Bay side are going to be under duress. And it was interesting because we kind of know that Plum Island is a fragile asset. It's a barrier island, of course, but this is one of the first studies that has said climate change is here. There's going to be more flooding on Plum Island. And so some of the residents should be thinking about what they can do if they're going to have 2 or 3 feet of water in the spring or 2 or 3 feet of water as soon as the snow leaves. Now, this is an important element. And I mention it because one of the stats brought forth was that in Newbury, 24% of Newbury's tax base is on Plum Island. I mean, that is a lot. So they need, the houses to still be on Plum Island, and because they get a great deal of revenue. So as we know, Newbury, has half of Plum Island about, and Newburyport has the other half. Now for Newburyport, it's only about 6% of their tax revenues come from houses on Plum Island. So as I reflect upon things, and I used to be a reporter for the Daily News in Newburyport, I and other people always, were kind of puzzled why the town kept giving permits for people to build on a barrier island. For instance, 4 or 5 years ago, houses were lost on the Newbury end, down in the south end, almost as far as the refuge. But they, 2 or 3 have been rebuilt in the same places where the erosion occurred and the storms took them away. And so one would think, at least if one were from a different area, one would think, why are they building that in the same place that the house just got carried away by the Atlantic? Well, one reason it appears is that the town wants the tax revenue. It's a dicey thing, but those houses are going up again. And so this is one reason. If 24% of your tax revenue is coming from Plum Island, as is the case in Newbury, then you're going to say, sure, put a house there. We need to collect 10,000 or 20,000 or whatever from the revenue each year. Newburyport, again, is about 6%. So I think Newburyport is a little stricter on putting in new houses, but nevertheless, I think we're aware that new houses are always going up in Newbury and Newburyport on Plum Island. Now, as I have said in the past, Plum Island is a very beautiful place. I've sat on the porches of several homeowners out there, and I can see why, people want to live there. But the other element that Storm Surge and its consultants came up with is it's going to cost an increasing amount of money to keep the roads under good repair when the water is rising. For instance, there's talk now of raising the Plum Island Turnpike, say between the Audubon Society and Plum Island itself, perhaps raising that, because that at sometimes is going to be underwater. So they're interesting financial questions, interesting engineering questions. And I just mention it because finally people are, these consultants and Storm Surge, these folks are saying, well, we've got to start talking about this. And we had a very bad year. I think it's 2015. There was a great deal of snow. The storms were big. I think 3 or 4 houses were so battered by the erosion in the sea that they had to be demolished. And about 24 houses were under condemnation for quite a while. So we know that bad things are coming. We know the sea is rising and the river is rising. So I attended both of those storm surge events via Zoom, and I think I got a little smarter from it. Now I've got to say, they had some pretty good figures for how much surge is going to be by 2030. Now that is about 9 years from now. Then they went to 20,050, and I was almost interested. And then they go to 2100. It means approximately 79 years from now. And I would think numerous other people on the call said, 79 years from now is doubtful. I'm going to be here to see if they're accurate or not. But anyway, I listened to those projections for 9 years hence, and it looks like climate change is bringing higher water. It's going to bring more damage to Plum Island homes. It's going to create much more expense in terms of keeping the roads passable. But again, the communities, especially Newbury, want the roads to be passable. They want those houses in that community to be viable because 24% of their tax revenue is coming from Plum Island. So I just mentioned it. Plum Island's a terrific asset. And I noticed that, and it's so interesting because as you folks know, half of it is much built up with houses. It used to be shacks and cottages until about 2001. And then water got out there, sewage got out there, and mansions started cropping up. And mostly now is what we have is mansions. But we still have the Federal Reserve to the southern edge. And I noticed that even Lot 1 is being closed now because of concerns about birds. The plovers are nesting, the plovers are reproducing. And so Lot 1 was closed for several days. It may still be closed. I'm going down there this afternoon and peer into Lot 1. But as I say, this river area has a terrific history. I think we're going into a new part of that history with climate change, with higher water, with much more expense for keeping the roads passable down at Plum Island. And as we all know, it's just a terrific asset. Here is what you can see is Reservation Terrace to the right there, the sandbar, and those jetties, which were reconstructed about 5 years ago. It was federal money, $10 million a jetty. They did it to improve navigation. And there's a lot of boats out so far this year. But it's a great place when the weather's terrific. So many boaters come by. And it is a place where 1,500 vessels are registered with the harbor master in Newburyport. That's right, 1,500. And there's 500 registered in Salisbury, Amesbury, and upriver. Plus, there's Cashman Park. So the Merrimack is a very popular spot in part because it's getting, since 1972, it's become a bit cleaner. And so we're going to move forward and talk about a few things in terms of what's going on with different areas. And I'm trying to move forward with my clicking, and here we are. One of the great institutions of the Merrimack River is the Coast Guard. Here, if you're listening, the photo shows 3 Coast Guard vessels, and the Coast Guards were founded in Newburyport in 1790. It's been here since. Now, the word Coast Guard didn't come into play until 1915. That's when the Revenue Cutter Service, which was the original Coast Guard, and the Life Saving Service, which was also founded on the North Shore, merged. And so the word Coast Guard became operative in 1915. And then in 1939, the Lighthouse Service joined those two. And so since 1939, we have the Coast Guard. I'm trying to move along here. Haverhill, Massachusetts has made a big comeback in recent years. Here's a photo of it as the river got cleaner. They have put up condos and apartments, and there's some schools there. UMass Lowell is there. The Northern Essex Community College is there. And so they've been successful in improving. Here's the National Park Service, a photo. They have good tours in Lowell. They didn't have them during COVID, so you might want to check in to see if they're still having tours, if they've started them again. The Merrimack River, which was founded in 1605 by Europeans, as some caller pointed out to me, the Native Americans had been onto it for centuries, but by Europeans, it was founded by Samuel de Champlain, the French in 1605. And since then, it has been, a real gem of the North Shore. It starts in Franklin, New Hampshire. And here's a photo from Franklin that shows how beautiful it is, how clean it is, and it's still very much an asset. There are about 11 major tributaries to the Merrimack. Here, the Nashua River meets the Merrimack, and this is one of the elements that comes into the river. It is a bucolic site, and the Powell River is another one. Of course, that's local, comes through Amesbury, but there are about 11. The Merrimack River comes through Manchester, New Hampshire, of course, and there's still scores of small power stations that get their power from the river, and they create electricity. This one's in Manchester, New Hampshire. So even though power started being harnessed in about the 1820s in Lowell, Massachusetts, it's still being harnessed for electricity today. The other element that is still usable of the Merrimack River is people, almost 500,000 folks on the North Shore still get their drinking water from the Merrimack. Now that is a very high number, very impressive to me. I didn't realize that till I started this research, but it's another reason why we have to keep the Merrimack River clean. Of course, there's good science that purifies the Merrimack, but nevertheless, when new plants and chemical companies move in frequently in southern New Hampshire, it's important for state and federal officials to know what elements that they're putting into the river. Of course, they clean their waste, but federal regulation is very useful to examine exactly what is going to go into the river in future years. Lowell, of course, has been on the river for many years, was the first textile city. It was very successful. It has really, in recent years, gained greatly from the Merrimack. That's UMass Lowell to your right, that's a dormitory. And here you can see dams and locks and different elements that the Merrimack has been harnessed so that it can be used. Lowell, of course, has numerous ways to enjoy the river upstream from the factories. And here you can see there's some fishermen here. There's a jogger. In the background, there's some people walking their babies or just sitting along the river. So the Merrimack is still very popular all along the river. Here's a shot. As you know, the mills all take over much of the space along the Merrimack in Lowell. This is from Lowell. And I always vow to myself when I see images like this, well, it would make a great book to write about the Merrimack River, which I have just done. I've written a book called Merrimack, the Resilient River, but maybe there's also a book on the brick making industry. So many thousands, actually millions of bricks were used over the years. And of course, if you've been on 495 in Lawrence, you can see those tremendously large mills and factories made of brick. Manchester is much improved, as well as Lowell and Haverhill. And here's a shot of Manchester. To the right is some of the old mill buildings from the Ameskeag Manufacturing Company. And in the background, you can see different banks and hotels. And Manchester is a very prosperous community along the Merrimack. We're coming up on 2 years since a group went all the way down the Merrimack River. It was called the Voyagers, 2019. There were about 12 to 15 who got together in Franklin, New Hampshire. They put their kayaks in and they came all the way down the river to Plum Island. And here's Jim Kelcourse. He's a state rep. He's in the lead position. Behind him is Lane Glenn, who is the president of Northern Essex Community College. So that was really a great run. It took them 4 days. It rained several times, and they were concerned about, having CSOs of sewage discharges on the water. In fact, because it rained so much, there were a couple discharges. But I think all of them, and Jim Kelcourse has told me this, they had a renewed respect for the river and how beautiful it is. And it looks wonderful right here. Here are about a dozen of them coming down the river. This is a quieter moment, and they're getting near the Atlantic, but here they have, this is in the Lawrence Haverhill area. They have a little farther to go. This is one of my favorite images of the river. This is, of course, Newburyport Harbor. It has, thousands of vessels, as we've said, that are registered each year, and a beautiful spot right along the Merrimack. The ocean is beyond there. Plum Island is farther back, and what a beautiful photo. Now, the boats are going into the Merrimack right now, and as I was driving past it this morning, I also saw swimmers right down in Joppa. So traditionally, the Merrimack has been used for swimming, but nowadays, because of these CSOs, combined sewage overflows, real pollution gets into the water when there's too much rainwater. So if it hasn't rained for 3 or 4 days, maybe you can go into the river down at our end, Newburyport, or you can take your dog in. But if it's been raining, the ecologists say, do not go into the river. There's bacteria, there's coli, there are bad things. But this morning, I did see some swimmers. Here's a beautiful spot. Amesbury and Merrimack, the two communities come together along the Merrimack, and it's just a wonderful spot and getting filled up with vessels. Here are a couple fishing boats. Fishing used to be an enormous industry in Newburyport and Amesbury. Of course, in recent years, the fish stocks have diminished. The federal government has taken a much larger hand. And so there's only about 6 or 8 fishing boats in Newburyport nowadays. But I must say that it wasn't the local fishermen that, fished out the fish or created problems. 20 or 30 years ago, there were these enormous factory ships from Norway and Japan that would stay, 200 miles off our coast and just take an enormous amount of fish. And, in my view, they did a lot more damage to the fish supply than any small fishermen. Now, the striped bass are coming back. They have to be about 32 inches long now to take them. But this is one area where I think the federal government was successful. About 20, 25 years ago, they said, look, the stripers are disappearing. Number one, we're going to say commercial fishermen can't net them anymore. Number two, we're going to put a limit on how much each boat can take. And number three, we're not going to let people get the schoolies anymore. Schoolies are small stripers, maybe 12 to 20 inches. I used to catch them on the Saco River up in southern Maine when we lived in Biddeford Pool, Maine. But now they have to be 30 to 32 inches, and the stripers are coming back. Now, here are a couple of voyagers. That's State Rep Jim Kelcourse in the stern and State Senator Diana DiZoglio in the bow. They were two of the individuals from the voyagers who got in the kayaks every day and did the whole river, 117 miles long. Here is one of my heroes, Ellen Swallow Richards. She lived more than a century ago. She was the first woman graduate of MIT, and she was a great scientist in the essence of drinking water. Her maiden name, Ellen Swallow, is a good maiden name if you're going to go into drinking water. But in about 1890, there were a number of deaths up in Lawrence and Lowell from typhoid. And so a state panel was put together to study this. They got a number of scientists from MIT. Ellen Swallow Richards was one of them. And there were about a half a dozen or a dozen men. But I like to focus on women whenever they pop up in history. And she was one of the ones who created a science for better drinking water and really defeated typhoid in the Merrimack. She also is considered the mother of home economics. She lived in Cambridge, and she introduced women to the art of cleaning the kitchen, the art of better diets, the art of balanced meals. And in addition to that, she was one of the first women to start what's known today as the AAUW, the American Association of University Women. She was a true all-star, she really was. Here's another of my heroes, Senator Edmund Muskie of Maine. He sponsored the Clean Water Act of 1972, and there really wasn't much of an environmental movement until that time. But in 1969, the Cuyahoga River in Ohio caught fire. This is true. There was a picture on the cover of Time magazine. There were so many chemicals from, the big companies that were, just dumping everything they had from their factories into the river that it caught fire. And this, just infuriated everybody. Ed Muskie had helped with the Clean Air Act, and now he was instrumental in getting the Clean Water Act passed. He was a national figure in 1968 when he ran for vice president with Hubert Humphrey. And he was also tried to get the nomination for president in 1972. He did not get it, but he kept up his work for clean water. And here he is in 1972 talking about the Clean Water Act. That's his wife, Jane, in the rear. And he was a real warrior on clean water. He came from Rumford, Maine, on the Androscoggin, which was very polluted in the 40s and 50s when he grew up. And Muskie was very valuable on the Clean Water Act. Senator George Mitchell of Maine was also important. He helped pass the amendments in 1987. President Reagan wanted to get rid of the Clean Water Act, but Mitchell said, no, okay, you're going to stop the federal grants for sewage treatment plants, but let us have low interest loans so that communities can borrow money from the feds at a low interest and build their own. So this isn't as well known as Muskie, but George Mitchell was important in the 1987 amendments. Paul Tsongas was a great champion of the river. Here's a wonderful photo of he and his family and his wife, Nikki, who herself served in Congress after his death. He died in 1997 at the age of 56, and that is his grave along the Merrimack. The Whittier Bridge is a beautiful site. It's been built in recent years, as you know, and it just shows you how beautiful the river can be. This is one challenge of the Merrimack. This is not from a sewage treatment plant. It's from, catching pipes that catch rainwater. This is from Methuen, but you can see what a mess it is. It's dirty here. their shopping carts in there. And from time to time, we still read about tires being pulled out of the river, or a car occasionally, or even hypodermic needles. So, the river is clean in many spots, but we have to keep working to keep it clean, because this is an example. Newburyport also has pipes that pick up rainwater and they take it down to the river. This is, again, this is not a sewage pipe, but this is along the boardwalk in Newburyport, and shows, again, a pipe that'll pick up rainwater, but in that rainwater, there's, oil and gasoline and beer cans and plastic bottles. So I think they're trying to figure out a way to get rid of those pipes going into the river. Here's the beautiful Merrimack, and you can see the development that's taking place in recent years. This is in the Amesbury, Haverhill area, but a beautiful air shot it is. The Newburyport-Salisbury line and bridge is very scenic, and particularly at sunset, a beautiful spot. Senator Diana DiZoglio, who we last saw in a kayak on the Merrimack, is shown here in her official duties and has done a lot to create the Merrimack River Commission, which is created last year to help improve the river. Now, you probably didn't expect to see a smiling picture of Richard Nixon today, but here he is. He's on the left, Hubert Humphrey's in the middle, and that's Senator Ed Muskie on the right. And these were three people involved in the creation of the Clean Water Act. This is the end of the presentation. I have been doing it for 97 sessions. This is our 97th. Started almost 2 years ago. We're coming up to our 100th. I'm trying to get an informative guest for that time. But, I enjoy talking about the health and history of the river. I recently wrote a book titled Merrimack, the Resilient River. And here you can see, this is the cover of the book. There, as we can see at the top, is where it starts in New Hampshire. And at the bottom is the Newburyport Harbor, taken from a drone. And so it was exciting to go from Franklin, New Hampshire, all the way down to Newburyport, where we live, and go to the different communities, take photos, talk about and see its improvements. And while, I think everyone, comes to this conclusion that it's a beautiful river. It does have drawbacks. For instance, the combined sewage overflows put effluent in the river, probably 500 million gallons a year. That's a lot, but it's a fast-moving river. It regenerates itself. And so in many places, it's clean and beautiful, and is fishing. It can be done there, as I say. I saw some paddle boarders today on the river. I saw some kayakers. Also, there were some swimmers. So the Merrimack, it's a resilient river. It's gone through a lot since the textile mills started there in the 1820s. They used to put all their sewage into the river. Sometimes the river turned orange or turned purple because that was the color dye they were using those days. But because of the Clean Water Act, and because a lot of people are taking better care, keeping their beer cans and plastic bottles out of the river, it's becoming much cleaner. We'll be back next week to talk about the Merrimack River. And again, this is our 97th session. We're coming up to 100. Actually, I'm quite pleased that we made 100. When I started this more than 2 years ago, I didn't know how long it would last, but I think people like to hear people talk about the river, to discuss it. Today, we talked about Plum Island and what's happening there. So we'll be back next week. We'll be talking here on 96.3 Joppa Radio, Comcast Channel 9. This is Life Along the Merrimack, the podcast. This is Dyke Hendrickson, and we'll look forward to getting together again next week. Thank you for being here.